Imagine this. You wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, breath shallow. A strange unease lingers in the air. It's as if something unseen is lurking just outside the edges of your consciousness, waiting, watching. You try to dismiss it as a passing moment, a mere glitch in your waking mind. But then, a thought strikes you. What if you've been ignoring this presence for far too long? What if that unease is not some external force, but something deep within you, something that has been quietly manipulating your choices, your behavior, even your identity? Now here's the twist. What if the very essence of who you think you are, the person you've come to know yourself as, is merely an illusion, a mask you wear to protect yourself from something far darker, far deeper than you ever dared to face? What if this mask, the persona you've cultivated to navigate the world, is actually a prison built brick by brick with the materials of your own repressed desires, fears, and shame? The truth is that there is a part of you lurking in the shadows that you've tried desperately to suppress, a part that has been relegated to the hidden corners of your psyche, never to see the light of day. And yet, despite your best efforts, it whispers to you in moments of weakness. It shapes your actions in ways you cannot control, and it dances behind your every thought, every decision, every reaction. This part of you is not some abstract philosophical concept. It is your shadow, the hidden, unacknowledged aspects of yourself that you refuse to confront. But here's the problem. The shadow is not something you can simply ignore. It is a force of nature, something as integral to your being as the air you breathe. No matter how hard you try to bury it, it grows stronger, more insistent. It demands recognition. And here's the most unsettling part. If you do not confront it, it will consume you. The question then becomes, what happens when your shadow finally reveals itself? What if this shadow, this repressed darkness, has the potential to tear down everything you believe about yourself? What if, in refusing to face it, you've been unknowingly surrendering control of your own life, your own choices, your own soul? Now consider this paradox. The more you attempt to suppress the shadow, the more power you give it. In trying to avoid it, you may very well be allowing it to dictate your life from the shadows, steering your choices, fueling your destructive behaviors, and sabotaging your deepest desires. It might be the thing that prevents you from achieving your highest potential. It might be the reason you can't form lasting relationships, why you struggle with addiction, or why you feel restless, like something essential is missing from your life. But here's the most profound question of all. How can you truly be free if you never acknowledge what is holding you back? How can you transcend the cycle of self-sabotage if you refuse to face the very parts of yourself that are responsible for it? Can you ever be whole, truly whole, without embracing the darkness within you? You might think that you can hide from it forever, that you can maintain your comfortable illusion of self-control. But deep down, you sense that this is a lie, a falsehood you tell yourself to feel safe. And as much as you may try to avoid the truth, it follows you, growing louder, more insistent. It doesn't care about your comfort. It doesn't care about your carefully constructed identity. It is the force that demands you evolve or perish. And so, the battle begins. It is a battle between the shadow and the soul. The shadow, the suppressed, forgotten, and ignored part of yourself, wants to drag you back into the darkness. The soul, the deeper, truer essence of who you are, wants to break free, to step into the light of full awareness, to integrate and transcend. This is not merely a psychological battle. This is a war for your very essence. Your soul is yearning for liberation, for truth, for wholeness. But can it truly be free if it's constantly held captive by the forces of the shadow? And what happens if you choose not to fight this battle, if you turn away from the very thing that would bring you to your truest self? And so we arrive at the question that will guide us. How do you face the shadow within and integrate it into your soul? How do you move beyond the illusion of safety and confront the darkness that resides in all of us? And more importantly, what happens to you, to your life, when you finally allow this confrontation to take place? The answer, though it may seem elusive, is hidden within the struggle itself. And in the next section, we will explore why this battle exists in the first place and how it shapes everything we do, think, and feel. Because until you understand the roots of this conflict, you cannot begin to understand the true nature of your soul. Stay with me. The journey is about to get deeper. To understand the battle between your shadow and your soul, you must first confront a simple truth. This conflict is not new. It has existed since the beginning of human consciousness. The problem, in its essence, is not personal. It is collective. It is deeply embedded within the very fabric of human nature, woven into our psyche by forces both biological and societal. It is a legacy, one passed down through generations, which continues to shape who we are, how we live, and how we perceive ourselves. But where does this internal war come from? Why does the shadow emerge, and what does it want? And most importantly, why do we refuse to face it? The root of the shadow: repression and denial. Carl Jung, perhaps the most famous explorer of the unconscious, gave us the concept of the shadow as the part of two. His psyche that contains all the aspects of ourselves that we find undesirable or unacceptable. It is the hidden, darker side of our personality, the parts of us we fear, deny, or repress. These might include our anger, our jealousy, our greed, our desires for power or control, or even our darker impulses that society deems immoral. But the shadow is not just a collection of our so-called negative traits. It is also where our unacknowledged potential resides. Jung believed that it holds parts of us that, if integrated into our conscious selves, could lead to personal transformation and greater authenticity. However, because we live in a culture that values order, control, and social conformity, we are taught to repress these parts of ourselves. We are told that our worth is determined by our outward behavior, our goodness, our ability to fit in. We learn that anything that does not conform to the ideal image of who we should be is wrong, even evil. This pressure to conform creates a psychological split. The mask we present to the world becomes more than just a social tool. It becomes our reality. We stop acknowledging the parts of ourselves that do not fit the mold of acceptable behavior. Instead of integrating our shadow into our conscious lives, we bury it deep within, hoping it will stay out of sight. But what happens when we refuse to look at it? The shadow doesn't disappear. It festers, it grows stronger, and it begins to influence us in ways we cannot see. As Jung warned, the more you try to suppress the shadow, the more it rules your life. You may think you've buried your anger or your fear, but that very suppression turns into a force that manifests in your relationships, your actions, and your deepest conflicts.
Nietzsche, the will to power and the fear of authenticity. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher who radically redefined the human spirit, understood the dangers of repression. For Nietzsche, the true nature of a human being was not to be found in social roles, moral codes, or the conventions of society. Rather, it was in the unrestricted expression of individual will, the will to power, that one could achieve authenticity and greatness. But Nietzsche's philosophy was not just a call to personal freedom, it was a call to confront the darker aspects of existence, to face suffering, chaos, and the abyss, and to use those forces to fuel personal growth. For Nietzsche, the shadow was not to be feared or rejected. Instead, it was to be embraced as an essential part of life. The human being who lives authentically is not one who denies their shadow, but one who integrates it into their soul. This is the path to becoming the Übermensch, the overman, who transcends the limits of conventional morality and creates their own values. The problem, however, is that most people live in fear of their shadow. They are afraid of what it might reveal about their true nature, an uncontrollable, untamed force that rejects the safety of societal norms. And so they cling to the mask. They cling to the illusion of order, of righteousness, of a controlled self-image, all while their shadow grows stronger in the background, waiting for its inevitable confrontation. This is where the tension lies. On one side, there is the soul, which seeks freedom, authenticity, and the embrace of all parts of the self. On the other, there is the shadow, which challenges everything we hold dear, forcing us to face the parts of ourselves we fear the most. And between these two, there is an endless struggle for control, for dominance. Schopenhauer, the despair of the will. If we look at the thoughts of F. Arthur Schopenhauer, we can see another layer of this struggle. Schopenhauer, in his pessimistic philosophy, believed that human beings are driven by an irrational will, a blind force that seeks satisfaction without ever reaching fulfillment. For Schopenhauer, the will was both the source of our suffering and our ultimate reality. It is the deep, unconscious force that drives us to seek pleasure, success, and power.
even when we know that these pursuits will never bring us true happiness. Schopenhauer's view aligns closely with the idea of the shadow, for the will is often at odds with our conscious, rational mind. Our desires, impulses, and darker inclinations emerge from the will, and we are constantly in a state of conflict between our conscious intentions and the powerful, unacknowledged forces driving us beneath the surface. In his worldview, the human condition is one of eternal striving, a constant reaching for something just out of grasp. But what if this struggle, this endless striving, is not only a reflection of our desires, but also a manifestation of our shadow? What if the more we chase after fleeting pleasures or ideals, the more we are feeding the very forces that imprison us? Schopenhauer's solution to this eternal conflict was renunciation, the idea that to escape suffering, one must detach from the will and its endless desires. But is this possible in a world where the shadow, by its very nature, refuses to be ignored? Is renunciation the answer, or do we need a new way to approach the forces that control us? Society and the mask of conformity, the struggle between the shadow and the soul, does not take place in a vacuum. It is heavily influenced by the societal forces that shape our identity. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to fit into a predefined role. Our family, our education, our culture, and our peers all push us to conform to expectations. Expectations about how we should look, behave, think, and feel. In a world that rewards compliance and punishes deviation, the shadow becomes a necessity for survival. To fit in, we must suppress what doesn't align with societal norms. We mask our true selves, hoping that if we just follow the rules, we will find peace, acceptance, and purpose. But this only deepens the conflict within. The more we give in to society's demands, the further we drift from our authentic selves, and the more powerful our shadow becomes. The deeper we bury it, the more it festers, until it inevitably erupts in ways we can no longer control. This, then, is the root of the conflict. It is a battle for your soul, a war between the parts of you that seek to live freely and authentically, and the parts of you that have been repressed, conditioned, and silenced. And the only way to end this war is to face the shadow. But how? How can you possibly confront something so terrifying, so foreign, that it threatens to destroy everything you believe in? The answer lies in the next stage of this journey, where we will explore the unseen consequences of this struggle and how it shapes both personal and societal realities. But before we can do that, we must come to terms with the question, what does it mean to truly face the shadow, and what happens if we fail to do so? Imagine living your entire life as though you're trapped in a maze. At first, it seems like there are choices, paths you can take, roads you can follow. You feel as though you have some control over your destiny. But soon, as you walk deeper into the labyrinth, something unsettling starts to happen. The walls seem to close in, the paths narrow, and no matter which way you turn, you're met with the same dead ends. The maze is no longer a puzzle to solve. It becomes a prison of your own making. What if I told you that this maze isn't some metaphor for external forces, but a representation of your mind, the intricate web of choices, habits, fears, and unconscious drives that create the maze of your life? What if the walls that block you from true freedom aren't built by circumstances, but by the parts of yourself you refuse to confront? You've spent years following this path, trying to escape it by chasing achievements, relationships, possessions, and comforts, anything that promises a way out. But no matter what you achieve, there's an emptiness inside, a nagging sense that you've missed something crucial. This is the unseen consequence of not facing your shadow. It is the inner maze, the layers of repressed desires, unacknowledged fears, and unresolved conflicts that quietly shape your every thought and action. But here's the thing. Most of us don't even realize we're in it. The shadow is so deeply buried that its effects on our lives are subtle, like a silent current running beneath the surface, constantly pulling us off course. And yet, this current has the power to steer our lives in ways we cannot even comprehend. The cognitive biases that keep us trapped. To understand how this works, we need to look at the way our brains are wired. Our minds are not objective observers of reality. They are shaped by deep-seated biases and patterns that distort our perceptions and decisions. These biases, many of which have roots in evolutionary psychology, work to reinforce the narratives we tell ourselves about who we are and what we believe is true about the world. Take, for example, confirmation bias, the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information that confirms our existing beliefs while ignoring information that contradicts them. When it comes to the shadow, this bias plays a powerful role. You might have certain beliefs about yourself, ideas that you are competent, moral, or in control, and when the shadow begins to surface, it challenges those beliefs. Instead of confronting this challenge, you suppress it. Your brain looks for ways to dismiss the shadow as irrelevant or unimportant, even though the deeper parts of you know otherwise. Confirmation bias allows you to ignore the things that don't fit within your self-image, keeping the shadow locked away in the dark corners of your mind. Over time, this reinforcement creates a cycle, one where the very things that could help you evolve and grow are continually dismissed, buried, or rationalized away. The self-serving bias is another mechanism at play. This bias leads you to attribute positive outcomes to your own abilities and actions while blaming negative outcomes on external factors. When you fail, when you act out in ways that you regret, the shadow provides an easy scapegoat. It tells you that you were forced to act that way because of someone else's behavior or because of some external stressor. You never acknowledge that the shadow, the darker, unconscious parts of you, had a role in shaping your behavior. But the more you use these mental shortcuts to avoid confronting your shadow, the more deeply entrenched it becomes in your psyche. The unseen consequences of these cognitive biases are that you begin to lose touch with the truth of who you are. Your self-awareness becomes distorted, your choices increasingly reactive, and you find yourself trapped in patterns of behavior that feel more like fate than free will. Addiction, the shadow's greatest weapon. One of the most insidious effects of not facing the shadow is its role in addiction. Addiction is often seen as a physical or emotional condition, but at its core, it is a psychological mechanism, a way the shadow takes control of the individual. Think of addiction not just as substance abuse, but as any compulsion or behavior that you turn to in order to avoid confronting the pain of your unconscious mind. Gabor Mate, a renowned expert on addiction, has spoken at length about the role trauma and repression play in the development of addictive behaviors. He argues that addiction is not a oral failing, but a coping mechanism for deep-seated emotional wounds. When you refuse to face your shadow, when you suppress the parts of yourself that are uncomfortable or painful, the psyche will find a way to express those repressed emotions, and often it does so through addiction. But addiction doesn't just take the form of drugs or alcohol. It can manifest in the need for constant validation, the obsessive pursuit of achievement, or the compulsion to control others. All of these behaviors serve the same purpose: to distract you from the inner chaos created by the shadow. But the deeper you go into addiction, the further you distance yourself from the possibility of healing. Each hit, each approval, each conquest pulls you further from the truth of who you are. The shadow controls you by keeping you distracted, by creating false narratives that provide temporary relief from your discomfort. In this way, addiction becomes a powerful tool of the shadow, keeping you trapped in an endless cycle of self-deception. The social mask and its dangers. The consequences of ignoring the shadow also extend to society. We live in a world that rewards the mask, the persona we put on to fit in, to be accepted, and to avoid judgment. But this mask, while it may seem like a tool for survival, is often the very thing that prevents us from being authentic. The more we identify with this mask, the further we drift from our true selves. Consider the societal pressure to succeed, to be constantly productive, to never show weakness. We are taught that vulnerability is a flaw, that honesty is a luxury, and that showing your emotions is a sign of failure. This creates a culture in which the shadow is not only suppressed on an individual level but is also socially encouraged. We are constantly bombarded with images of idealized perfection, whether through social media, advertisements, or cultural norms, and this fuels the need to conform. But in doing so, we create a world full of people who are disconnected from their own humanity, people who live in fear of being exposed for who they really are, people who live with the illusion of connection, when in reality they are isolated by their unwillingness to embrace their true selves. The existential crisis. As the shadow grows more powerful, its effects become harder to ignore. you begin to feel disconnected from your true desires, from the people around you, and from the very meaning of your life. This existential crisis occurs when the parts of yourself that you've hidden from the world start to demand recognition. The void you feel isn't just a lack of success or achievement, it's the result of living a life that doesn't reflect who you truly are. This crisis might take the form of a midlife breakdown, a sense of existential dread, or an overwhelming feeling of emptiness. But the root cause is the same. The shadow, left unchecked and unexamined, begins to consume your sense of self and pulls you toward an inevitable reckoning. And this is where the stakes become highest. As long as the shadow remains unexamined, it will continue to influence your life in ways you cannot see. It will shape your relationships, your career, and your sense of purpose. It will keep you stuck in patterns of self-sabotage, in cycles of addiction, in a state of perpetual dissatisfaction. But what if there was a way out? What if the way to free yourself from this cycle, this maze of your own making, was not to avoid the shadow, but to confront it? This is the next step in the journey, the rebellion. In the next section, we will explore how to break free from the shadow's grip, how to challenge the illusions that have held you captive, and how to reclaim your life, your soul, and your true identity. The breakthrough is coming, but first, you must be ready to confront what you fear the most. At some point, the weight of the mask becomes unbearable. You can no longer ignore the gnawing feeling that something crucial is missing. You've been running from the truth, from the deeper parts of yourself, but now, that truth is beginning to demand your attention. The shadow has grown too powerful to remain hidden. It manifests in your thoughts, in your actions, in your dreams. This force that has been lurking in the dark corners of your psyche is now screaming for recognition. The question is, will you continue to hide from it, or will you confront it? This is the rebellion, the moment where you refuse to be a passive participant in the drama of your life. This is the decision to stand in the light of your full self, embracing not just the parts of you that are easy to love, but also the parts that you have feared, denied, and rejected. And the first step in this rebellion is to acknowledge the shadow. Embrace the shadow. The path to integration. Carl Jung spoke of the necessity of integrating the shadow into the conscious self. Integration doesn't mean letting your darker impulses rule you, nor does it mean indulging in every destructive urge. Instead, it means acknowledging that the shadow is part of you, the messy, complicated, raw side of your nature that you have been running from. Integration is not about controlling the shadow, but about understanding it and using its energy to fuel transformation. The first step in embracing the shadow is to stop avoiding it. This is where many people falter. They might acknowledge that they have fears or weaknesses, but they rarely sit down and ask themselves why these aspects exist. What is the source of your anger? Why do you feel inferior at times? What is the deeper fear that keeps you from truly connecting with others? Ask yourself these questions not with judgment, but with compassion. The shadow isn't an enemy to destroy, it's a part of you that needs your attention. It has been waiting in the dark, perhaps out of sight, but never out of mind. The more you confront it directly, the less power it has over you. And there's something liberating in this confrontation. As you begin to bring the unconscious into consciousness, the heavy burden of repression starts to lift. The shadow becomes less of a haunting, less of a terror, and more of a tool for personal growth. You begin to see that the very parts of yourself you have feared are the same parts that contain your strength, resilience, and authenticity. Let go of the mask. The path to authenticity. One of the most powerful shifts in the rebellion against the shadow is the decision to let go of the mask. This doesn't mean that you have to reject social norms or become a pariah. It means letting go of the false self that has been holding you back. It means no longer pretending to be someone you're not in order to gain approval, acceptance, or safety. To do this, you must be willing to take the risk of being real, being raw, vulnerable, and honest, even when it feels uncomfortable. You must be willing to face the judgments of others, knowing that those judgments are merely projections of their own unresolved shadows. This is where the will to power, as Nietzsche described it, comes into play. The will to power isn't about dominating others or proving your worth through external success. It is about asserting your right to live authentically, to express your deepest truth without fear of judgment. When you no longer fear the judgment of others, you can step into your full power, unashamed, unafraid, and unapologetic. Letting go of the mask means stepping into your true power, and that doesn't always look like what society deems as successful. It might mean failing openly and learning from it, changing your career to pursue something that is deeply meaningful to you, or even choosing to live outside the expectations of others. But in this rebellion, you are no longer living for anyone else, you are living for your own soul. Radical acceptance, the power of self-compassion. There is another essential aspect of breaking free from the shadow's grip: radical acceptance. This means accepting yourself fully, without judgment or rejection. It means no longer holding on to the illusion that you must be perfect, that you must live up to some ideal standard of who you think you should be. Radical acceptance is the realization that you are enough as you are, with all your flaws, contradictions, and complexities. Schopenhauer believed that the human will was the root of all suffering, but he also suggested that freedom from suffering comes through the renunciation of the will. But rather than a renunciation of life itself, as Schopenhauer advocated, true freedom comes from embracing the full spectrum of human experience, including the pain, the messiness, and the darkness. To reject these parts of yourself is to reject your humanity. In the rebellion, you must learn to love the parts of yourself that you have pushed away. You must practice self-compassion, understanding that the shadow is not a mark of your failure, but a sign of your potential to grow. This shift in perspective is transformative. Instead of running from your flaws, you begin to see them as opportunities for growth, as invitations to explore the depths of your own psyche. The shadow is, in essence, your unacknowledged self, the part of you that contains the full range of human experience, from love to rage, from creativity to destruction. By refusing to face it, you deny your full humanity. But when you welcome it, when you accept all that you are, you move closer to a whole, integrated self, the transformational power of confronting the shadow. What happens when you confront your shadow and let go of the mask? What happens when you embrace the fullness of your being and live in alignment with your true self? The answer is radical transformation. The energy that once went into repression, avoidance, and fear can now be used to fuel your creativity, your relationships, your work, and your sense of purpose. When you no longer have to hide, you become more powerful, more present, and more aligned with your soul's deepest desires. The shadow that once controlled you now becomes your ally. You begin to see the ways in which the darkness can guide you toward growth. The rage that once felt destructive can become the fuel for passion and purpose. The sadness that seemed to paralyze you can open the door to empathy and wisdom. The parts of you that felt like weaknesses become your greatest strengths. In this rebellion, you discover that true freedom doesn't come from escaping your inner darkness. It comes from facing it and making it part of your journey. You become more than just a product of your circumstances or societal expectations. You become the author of your own life, and the only way to do that is to embrace the full range of your experience, both light and dark. The call to action: living without fear. Now, as you confront the shadow and step into the fullness of who you are, a new question emerges. What do you do with this newfound power? The answer is simple: live without fear. When you stop hiding, when you no longer fear the judgment of others or the consequences of being authentic, you unlock the power to create and experience life on your own terms. You are no longer trapped by the maze of your own mind. You are no longer a prisoner of your fears, your judgments, or your past. The rebellion is not just about personal transformation, it is about stepping into the world as an authentic being, unafraid of your own complexity. It is about living fully, without hiding parts of yourself for fear of rejection. It is about creating your own path, regardless of what others may think or expect. This is the radical shift in perspective that can set you free. The shadow no longer holds you captive. Instead, it is the fuel that propels you forward into a life that is uniquely yours, full of depth, authenticity, and profound meaning. In the final section, we will explore the ultimate truth, the revelation that ties all these threads together and offers a final understanding of the battle between the shadow and the soul. But before that, take a moment to reflect on the power you hold in your hands, the power to break free, to live authentically, and to reclaim your soul. The final step of this journey is closer than you think. Imagine standing at the edge of a precipice, overlooking an endless expanse. You can feel the wind in your hair, the sharpness of the air, and the weight of every choice you've made leading you to this very moment. You've fought the battle, faced the darkness, torn down the walls that once confined you, and you're left standing, free, but with the realization that the journey was not what you thought it would be. The truth you were seeking was always closer than you could have imagined. It was never about escaping the shadow. It was never about fixing yourself or becoming someone else. It was about accepting the one thing most people refuse to face: the truth that the shadow and the soul are not two separate entities. They are two halves of the same whole. The paradox is unsettling. To become fully yourself, you must embrace everything you once rejected. The shadow is not something you conquer, but something you integrate. It was never an adversary. It was always a part of you waiting to be acknowledged. And in acknowledging it, you free yourself. This is the ultimate truth, the realization that has the power to change everything. You are not your idealized self. You are not the mask you wear. You are not the sum of your achievements or failures. You are the entirety of your being, the light and the dark, the conscious and the unconscious. Only when you realize this and accept it fully do you step into your authentic power. The paradox of wholeness. You've been told your whole life to strive for perfection, to be the best, to live up to some ideal of success or virtue. The world has trained you to reject any part of yourself that doesn't fit into this mold. But this pursuit of perfection, this attempt to become something flawless, is the greatest illusion you've ever believed. True wholeness, true self-realization, is not about becoming perfect. It is about embracing the inherent imperfection of your humanity. The shadow is not the enemy of the soul. It is the soul's counterpart. Without the shadow, the soul cannot grow, evolve, or transform. The darkness you feared is what allows the light to shine. The pain you've tried to escape is the very thing that brings you meaning and depth. It is through suffering that we are shaped into who we are meant to be. When you finally accept this paradox, that both light and shadow coexist within you, you step into a deeper understanding of your own nature. You realize that everything you've been running from is what holds the key to your freedom. This is why Carl Jung emphasized the importance of facing the shadow, because in doing so you uncover the deeper, truer aspects of yourself. You can no longer hide behind the illusion of perfection or the false self you've built. You confront your fears, your insecurities, your anger, your shame, and in doing so, you reclaim your authenticity. The parts of you that you've rejected are the parts that hold the power to transform your life. The path to liberation. A life lived fully. This realization is not something you can simply intellectualize. It must be experienced. To truly live the ultimate truth, you must embody it every day. This means stepping into the world not as a perfect, idealized version of yourself, but as a fully realized human being, whole, complex, and imperfect. It means acknowledging the parts of yourself that you've kept hidden and understanding that these parts are not weaknesses, but sources of great strength. You are no longer living for approval or external validation. You no longer need to prove anything to anyone. The battle between your shadow and your soul ends when you realize that the soul's deepest calling is not to escape the shadow, but to integrate it. This shift in perspective is transformative. The shadow, once seen as the source of your suffering, becomes the wellspring of your freedom. It is through facing your deepest fears, vulnerabilities, and contradictions that you unlock your full potential. You become someone who is no longer afraid of their own humanity, and in doing so, you step into the fullness of life, a life that is rich, deep, and meaningful. This, then, is the final truth. The shadow and the soul are not enemies. They are two sides of the same coin. Without the shadow, the soul cannot know itself, cannot grow, cannot evolve. The darkness is where your deepest wisdom lies, where your most profound transformation happens. The liberation of self-realization. You might ask, what now? How do I live in this new understanding? The answer is deceptively simple. Live authentically. In each moment, you must commit to embracing all parts of yourself. You must allow the shadow to inform your choices, not as a force of destruction, but as a force of wisdom. Each challenge, each moment of pain becomes an opportunity for growth, because now you understand that every part of you is a teacher. Living authentically means no longer fearing your flaws, but seeing them as part of your journey. It means finding peace with your contradictions and paradoxes. It means being fully present in each moment, knowing that you are enough as you are, without needing to be anything other than what you are. The liberation comes not when you finally fix yourself, but when you realize that you are not broken. You are a whole person, and in that wholeness, you find your deepest freedom. The battle was never about defeating the shadow, it was about embracing it, and through that embrace, discovering the truth of who you are. The final shift, a new beginning. As you stand at the edge of this new understanding, you see the world differently. The maze of your mind has unraveled, and you are no longer confined by the walls of your past beliefs, your repressed emotions, or the false self you once clung to. Instead, you walk forward into a life that is no longer bound by fear or shame. You walk into the unknown, knowing that you are enough. This is the true meaning of freedom, the ability to live authentically, to face your own contradictions without shame, to accept the full spectrum of your being without fear. It is the courage to be fully human, with all the complexities, joys, and pains that entails. The shadow is not a curse, it is the soil in which your soul's deepest truths grow. When you finally acknowledge the shadow and let it guide you, you discover that everything you've sought outside of yourself was never the answer. The answer has always been within you, in the dark and light parts of your soul, waiting for you to realize that you are whole. And so, the battle between the shadow and the soul ends not with a victory, but with a reconciliation. You don't conquer the shadow, you embrace it, and in doing so you step into a life of true power, true peace, and true freedom. This is the final revelation, that to live fully is not to live without darkness, but to live in harmony with it. And with that understanding, you are ready to step into the next chapter of your journey, a journey of self-discovery, self-acceptance, and ultimately, self-liberation.